Welcome, everybody. We got a new episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. I'm Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors. And of course, we have Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors here. Kevin, great to be back with you this week.
Yep, one more time.
I know, right? So let's see, just hot off the presses. Just happened. The governor just made some announcements in a web broadcast. Can you break that down for us? I know it has to do with the health order and some distancing issues. So please share with us what he shared with everyone.
Yep. And then if you are a Capital Advisors client, we're pumping out something that gives a little more detail on this, so you'll have that. But kind of the shorthand on it is that the governor did make some big news today by coming out with an order, a new health order that'll go across the state. And this addresses basically closing down the option of in-person instruction for all the school districts. By the way, it's public and private schools and charter schools in all of the counties that are on this county, the county list that most of you have become familiar with, where they've shut down counties for, barber shops and restaurants and all these different kinds of orders that the governor had put down already in the weeks that had just passed. So now on those county lists will be included now schools, and until basically that ends for that county, the school districts will not be able to provide in-person instruction. So it's going to be a distance learning approach. And some of the nuance of this order, again, and how you might reopen, really have created some ambivalence across the state with regard to the potential yo-yo effect of, are you on or are you off? If a county falls off, but then they end up being back on again, what are the implications for school districts in terms of trying to reopen and shut? What it means is that for the time being, we're really going to be going with sort of hopefully a more robust version of distance learning than what we experienced in the springtime, and that's really what the governor wants. And what we're hoping is that state officials really focus that much more intently on the issue of making what we're doing around distance learning, the resources for school districts, that much more of a serious investment. And we know that there's a good deal of money that's coming to you in federal dollars that can in fact be used for those purposes. We're going to talk a little bit about that toward the end. One of the things that I wanted to mention to you, though, is that what gets a county on that list or off that list is sort of a combination of key variables. And in that sort of matrix are positivity rates, transmission rates for the virus, hospital capacity, ICU capacity, and ventilator availability. All of those things are part of the mixture of considerations that go into whether a county is on that state watch list or not. The one thing that we wanted to mention to you has to do with if you're not actually on in one of those counties where the county is on the watch list, and as a result, you cannot do the in-person instruction. One of the things that the order today anticipates is that for those districts that are in counties that they were never on the watch list, or say you're in a county that comes off of the watch list, that there needs to be sort of school level guidance for you with regard to an outbreak that might happen. So they have that in here too, that at the classroom level, if you have a single case, and that was either a student or a staff member, then obviously that classroom shuts down, assuming that they go into quarantine, which would be subject to your local health rules. And obviously those kids would then be getting distance learning to the ability that they are, because they now have had exposure. But then you go to the school site level, and there's a metric there about 5% of student and staff requiring that if in fact they became affected, then you would be shutting down that school site. And then there's another metric of 25% if district-wide you're having 25% of an infection rate amongst the schools in the district, 25% of the schools, then you're shutting down district-wide. And there are protocols in here for reopening. But the really big news is the fact that the governor basically makes a mandate that you will not be doing in-person instruction, which has a whole lot of political implications locally, because in some cases, the decision about how you're reopening has become very politicized locally. the governor basically said, look, I want to get involved with this and make this so that's more about the virus and education than it is about politics. So he's inserted himself here. There's going to be controversy here too. I'm one of those that believes that there's really not a purpose for having a district kind of wide metric there. The idea that if some of your schools have an outbreak, but some of them don't, we know that buildings don't give the virus to buildings. I mean, it might not make sense that in some of the district where there are no cases and everything is fine, that you wouldn't be able to do some in-person instruction. It is a little nonsensical, but all of this is not perfect. They're doing, I think, their level best, and there will be more guidance coming on all of this stuff. Let me touch for a minute on the mask part of the order. So with regard to masks, there is now going to be a statewide order that makes it mandatory for the students that are in grades 3 and above to be wearing masks. Now, if a kid shows up and they don't have the mask on and they don't want to wear a mask, it'll be up to the discretion of you as a district and district policy that you might end up setting up about how you deal with that. And that part is flexible. So what we needed in schools was the requirement at the state level, a health order, that where we could talk to a family or we could mention to a student that it actually is required. If we then want to deny that child in-person service and tell them they need to do distance learning, you would have the ability to do that. If you want to, whatever the options are that you might want to employ there are up to you. And some people have said, well, then it isn't a mandate. Well, the point is that prior to this order, districts have had difficulty in being able to say to parents and families that it's required because it was just merely the district saying so. Now you've got basically the force of the state of California and the Department of Public Health saying that in fact it is required. And the analogous kind of situation would be in the orders that were put in place statewide about mask wearing, and we have certain local jurisdictions where police departments or others have said they're not going to enforce the order. That doesn't take away from the fact that it is a requirement statewide. It's really just a question about enforcement. You're going to have some flexibility on how you would implement that. So I think that covers it. I will mention that in grades kindergarten through second grade, it is strongly recommended but not required. And then obviously with regard to kids with disabilities or other circumstances, you're going to be given some flexibility on how you deal with children that have those kinds of circumstances where a mask would not be appropriate. So that's kind of the quick summary. Again, there's a lot of detail out there. There's been some good reporting on this, as well as the work that we've done in terms of the advisory that we're putting out. And I'm sure CDE will have guidance. We also put in our advisory some links directly to the California Department of Public Health that can get you some more information on that. So what else do we have, Tim?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks. A lot of stuff to chew on there, and I guess my heart goes out to the leaders that are trying to come up with the reopening plans, and they've already made some announcements, and they need to go back and make changes. But I guess this is part of our new normal. Things are going to continue to change, and we just have to be ready to roll with the punches.
On that, Tim, I want to echo your sentiment because I really do think it's appropriate, and I appreciate you mentioning that because so many local districts have put an incredible amount of work into trying to be creative about how they were going to do a blended approach. They've had extensive communications with their communities, their teachers, their classified staff, everybody together to prepare for something. Don't think that's just for naught. I mean, the truth is that at some point these numbers will go down. Your county will be off that watch list. And as you go back into a blended approach, in some ways it gives you a little bit of room to re-examine the plans that you've made under the pressure that we've had to see exactly what might fit. The other thing that I think is important is that it's been a great lesson for policymakers up here in Sacramento who had this very heavy emphasis and real pressure on us as LEAs to do the in-person instruction with an accountability approach that's woven into this. And then the numbers started to spike and they had to rethink that policy. So it's commendable that the state was willing to re-examine that and go in another direction, understanding what's going on with regard to this virus and make those changes. So, we're eventually going to get through this, but Tim, it's very much appreciated that you acknowledge kind of all the work that's been done in local districts.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And just to add a little bit of I guess, thought to a big news story that hit this week. We mentioned this before our broadcast that Twitter had a large-scale hack. Some of the most high-profile accounts on the platform were taken over by hackers. We're talking the likes of Joe Biden, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. And they cleverly put out a message that said, if you make a donation, we'll double that donation back to you. Took about 2 hours to catch the, to basically put an end to it. But by that time, they had stolen about $100,000 worth of Bitcoin before they were able to shut it down. And I think the moral of the story is, when you look at how it happened, it wasn't that someone was able to traverse through technology. It was actually a social engineering attack. And if you've watched some of the cybersecurity videos on our YouTube page, you'll know that social engineering attack happens when someone maybe calls you, gets some personal information, acquires that personal information, say over email, and they're able to use that information to basically reset your own password for your accounts and therefore take over your accounts. So the hackers took over a very high-level account at Twitter who had access to this information for multiple high-profile accounts. So this is one of the first attacks that we've seen of this kind. And I think as a school leader, how you process this is, this is happening on a more regular basis right now. Cybercrime is on the rise, as we've discussed. But one of the most important aspects of cybersecurity is you, as a person, protecting your own data. And when you get a call, someone's asking you for information, it may seem harmless. You should definitely be questioning who's on the other end of the phone. Perhaps call that company back to make sure you're talking to the right folks. And it's the same thing. If you get requests for information over email, make sure you know who's on the other end. And I will tell you this, if you spend some time and energy talking through this with your team of leaders, talk with your teachers and even your students, everyone who has access to your critical systems could fall victim to this. And there's no ill intention here, but it is something that we need to raise our awareness of collectively so that we can try to avoid these both personally and professionally to keep our data private. So really wanted to dig into that a little bit just so everybody understood. So Kevin, any questions or thoughts there? Because I was going to jump into some more funding stuff, but I just wanted to see if that was clear.
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to jump in, Kevin, because I know the CAG team did the budget updates, which was statewide, and you guys had thousands of people on. But I was just wondering if there were some of the people that are watching these YouTube broadcasts that hadn't been lucky enough to watch some of those. You really broke down the dollars that are available for education right now in California. They're going to be hitting districts very shortly and have a timeline that they have to be spent by. I was hoping you could give us a quick overview of that, just for the folks who hadn't seen those budget updates so they could get caught up.
Right. No, really good point. So there's $5.3 billion. In fact, the governor mentioned it today in underscoring the resources that have been put out there as one-time money, largely to mitigate learning loss and all the issues with regard to COVID. But some of the different parts of money have a little bit different rules that are assigned to them. And so, for example, there's actually 3 different timelines on the expenditure, the mandatory timeline by when you have to expend those dollars. The bulk of the money has to be expended by December 30th. And we've been joking around that the federal government didn't realize that December had 31 days in it. So that could actually even maybe get modified in the language of this 5th round of stimulus that's being talked about in Washington, D.C. We would love them to push that deadline further so that it either matches the end of the school year or some of the other pots of money that we have that actually push it out even further. But for right now, big chunks of that money are going to have to be spent by December 30th. You'll have some comfort in knowing that when you get these allocations of money from the California Department of Education, it's going to come to you with some guidance with it that makes sure that you know how to account for it in terms of its account code. And then the second thing is you'll know what that expenditure deadline is for the appropriation that they're going to be making, that apportionment that they'll be making to you as a school district. So you'll have that. But to your point, Tim, there's one set of dollars you have to spend by December 30th. There's another set that's into 2021 and another set of dollars, smaller, that's in 2022. So in fact, it might even be later than that. But the point is that you've got different deadlines. And the thing that's really important to underscore here with all of this one-time money is that you can't put it into things that are, ongoing permanent expenditures that go out for a long time. One of the examples is that if you're going to spend it on attributing any personnel that help you with mitigating learning loss or some of the issues that are COVID related, and it's personnel oriented, well, that last payroll period goes past the 30th. If you go all the way to the end of December, you're going to be having people on that payroll to the 31st. But you want to make sure you have spent this allocation of money before the end of that month, meaning before the 31st, or it will not count. And you could end up putting yourself into a weird place if you don't get that accounting right. So just to kind of get that straight, the other thing is for sort of the interest that we always have on this broadcast, which is about technology, innovation, mitigation with regard to, what you're doing is with regard to distance learning. All of those kinds of expenditures are going to be appropriate under these. There are limits to what dollars amount you can spend for PPE and other kinds of expenditures. But on the technology front, almost every one of these pots of money is allowing you to use dollars for purposes of distance learning and COVID mitigation that's almost always linked back to technology, distance learning, and how we're reaching kids and we're making this all work. And it's really underscored even more by the governor's order today that essentially emphasizes that distance learning is the modality that we're going to be going with for the time being. So hopefully that helps. And Tim, we want everyone to know that when we do our next round of budget workshops, which we probably will do a set in late August or early September, given the fact that we're going to have some new financial data, hopefully action by Congress, which we really do think will occur. That's going to influence our deferrals, a lot of other things. We'll have more information on some of this as well.
Well, thanks, Kevin. There's lots of variables there, as you said on that first point. Variables seems to be the flavor of the day. So lots of variables in the funding, the time frames, and then there could be additional changes as we see federal support come in, which we've discussed several times on this broadcast as well. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that we'll see some more positive variables coming. One thing I wanted to mention on the tech side here is two big announcements this week from WebEx and also from Google that they've enhanced their web conferencing platforms to be better prepared to serve education. And that means they've eliminated some of the common things that were causing those Zoom bombs, where you'd have the wrong people showing up into your meeting, maybe disrupting your classroom. It's hard sometimes to know what to come up to sort of pay attention to in these times. So certainly we're trying to cover some of them on the broadcast. But as you're preparing to lean heavily on these tools for distance learning and reopen, you're going to be leaning on some of these platforms. Make sure you're staying up to date on the latest features, especially the EDU specific features, so that you and your team, your staff, and your students understand them and how to leverage them to keep people safe and secure. Also, just as we mentioned, way earlier in the broadcast when we first started talking about this, make sure you're investing in some professional development that's going to help you and your team get the most out of these tools. It's something that, your comfort level, your teachers, your students' comfort level is going to really raise the bar on how well you can connect with each other. So I would definitely encourage you to invest some more time and energy in these platforms. Make sure you consider the PD angle as well. And our final point that we wanted to dig into today, Kevin, was diagnostic assessment and what schools are going to be called on to assess and how. Could you talk a little bit about that for me?
Yeah. So the state superintendent, Tony Thurmond, did release some guidance, and it was about implementation tools for assessing student learning. And we just wanted to make sure, especially as there's a heightened sensitivity to learning loss and trying to calibrate what those learning gaps might be, that we're going to want to do some diagnostic and formative assessment. And the tools that the CDE put out today, or rather this week, emphasize what you can access. And so clearly Smarter Balanced is amongst those, the tools that they've developed, and those are free and available. But the other thing I wanted to point you to was what's going on with some of the other, what are sort of universally ready tools that are out there. So Curriculum Associates is one company that's developed some tools, and they are state approved already, along with some other options that you'll have so that if you've got access to those, you can get those and they're readily available. Use those too as tools to make this stuff happen. So we wanted to make sure we're highlighting that release by the Department of Education this week is something important that can help you.
All right, thanks, Kevin. And I think that wraps us up for the week. But I wanted to make sure we mention, we want to say thanks for watching these broadcasts on YouTube. If you like what you see here, please share it with your colleagues. This is free, obviously, to everyone. And in the spirit of trying to support folks in the time of great change, we're trying to provide you some timely info. Also, make sure you go ahead and click subscribe on the YouTube page here and the little notification bell. And as we post new videos, you'll get a little notification on your phone. You can listen to it, you can watch it at your convenience. But again, please help us spread the word about this. Make sure you subscribe, and we really appreciate you taking the time to listen. So if you have any questions for us, please shoot them in to Kevin or I, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. We can also address some of those questions in upcoming broadcasts. So thanks everybody for your time. Thanks very much, Kevin, and you have a great week upcoming, and we'll catch you next week when we do this again.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.